Okay, I make it 11 o'clock, which means it is time for today's workshop, our remarketing workshop. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is what I believe is the simplest and most effective form of marketing automation. For those who haven't met me before, my name is Dan Hare. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Forefront, and I am the one who looks after eShop on a day-to-day basis from a customer service perspective. And hopefully over the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to teach you some of the more innovative tools that we have on the platform, but equally some of my favorites because they are dead simple to use. So what we're going to try and do in today's session is look at a variety of things. We'll look at how you plan a remarketing campaign, and we'll look at best practices around it. What I will then do is I will give a practical demonstration of certain elements of the eShop platform which can be used to run remarketing campaigns. And don't worry, there'll be plenty of time at the end for questions and answers. If you haven't used the Zoom webinar utility before, it's slightly different from Zoom meetings. You'll see a different set of icons along the top or the bottom, and there is a Q&A facility. So if you have a question as we go through, just pop it in there, and what I'll do at the end of the session is leave plenty of time to address each of those questions at the end. Okay, so let's talk about remarketing. Why would you run a remarketing campaign? Well, they are really, really easy, but they're also incredibly effective. Quite often we see the best engagement rates, and indeed the highest conversion rates if it is a commercial remarketing campaign. And it also provides you with valuable intelligence around what your contacts are interested in and what they're doing. And what I mean by that is a remarketing campaign, as we'll look at when we talk about best practices in a minute, is often reflecting a behavior that you've already observed. So you see someone doing something on your website or in your CRM or in the real world perhaps, and you're fairly confident that is an indication that they are someone that you should engage with more on the particular topic. And a remarketing campaign is a great way of, in a very light touch way, touching a contact with more content or with a proposition and see how they react. And what we'll do is we'll look at some examples of best practice in that respect. Now, ordinarily, and I know we've got an eclectic mix of people on today's session who have many, many different types of email campaigns that they do. So what often happens is when I talk about remarketing campaigns, people will automatically go, well, that's e-commerce and that's not relevant to me. And nothing could be further from the truth. So although the most common users of remarketing campaigns, both in email and indeed other channels like PPC, tend to be e-commerce brands, they really are accessible to every type of email marketer, and hopefully I'll be able to prove that to you today. But you know, let's not dress it up. The past masters of effective remarketing campaigns tend to be e-commerce brands. Here's an email from just a week or two ago. I'd been on the Adidas website looking at a jumper which has got Home Simpson on it, and yes, I didn't buy it because it's too expensive. I'm waiting for the Black Friday sale, of course, but lo and behold, 24 hours later I get a remarketing email from them nudging me to buy it and indeed offering me a 20% off coupon. So it should arrive tomorrow. And similarly, researching a trip down to Bristol, I've been on TripAdvisor searching for accommodation, searching for things to do, and sure enough, regular as clockwork, because I'm logged in, because TripAdvisor know who I am, and they've got my email address, and I've given them permission, which is very important. They then send me an email telling me about all the crazy things I could get up to in Bristol, including the Only Fools and Horses tour of Bristol. There you go. So as I say, what you will often find is very, very good executions of remarketing within the e-commerce sphere, but it's not exclusive to them. The other thing is it's not exclusive to just a website behavior. So there are other ways in which a remarketing campaign can be useful beyond just trying to convert a sale from a previous website interaction, although that is the most common one. Now, when we look at what you can trigger a remarketing campaign for, certainly when we talk about a website, these tend to be the sorts of things that I would look at. And as you can see there from those first two, abandoned basket and purchase, those are e-commerce related. But when we talk about business to business and a more complex sale, then things like a case study page on your website is quite often a good indication of buying behavior. nobody tends to read case studies for fun. So if you're able to track people engaging with that sort of content, and that might be through another email campaign, or it might just be independently browsing to your website, then that says to me there's somebody who I could potentially retarget. If they're looking at a case study, they are probably interested in me more than just a passing visitor. As I'm sure many of you will decry on a regular basis, when you look at your website analytics, you get lots and lots of people that come to your website and leave, and that's just the nature of the beast. But some indicate buying behavior, some do some more interesting things. So if you're not e-commerce but you do have a sales proposition and it's a more complex one, then certainly things like case studies and pricing pages would be the sorts of content that I would look to run a remarketing campaign from. Now, also, obviously, a lot of people have content marketing, and that's an ongoing effort. Just because and there's often a lot of effort just to get people to engage with your content in the first place. But once they've engaged, that's also an opportunity for further engagement. So things like downloading a white paper is, again, a great remarketing exercise, both in terms of doing things like sending them a copy of the white paper, because I'm sure I'm not the only person to have downloaded a white paper or three and then completely forgotten to read them as the PDFs just sit in my download folder. So a little nudge to remind them that that asset is there and available to them is a good shout. The other forms of remarketing we often see from a content marketing perspective would be things like sending them further information. So you've read the white paper, there's some other white papers you might need to read. Here's a video or some other form of content on the same subject that would be useful. If you're running events, if you are doing things like promoting gatherings, which is back in fashion, I'm happy to say I've actually been invited to something. I'm actually going to leave the office and the house in the next few weeks for a business event. But if you're doing that sort of marketing, again, great opportunities for remarketing. When you see people looking at things like the speaker roster, if you are looking to get more delegates, but often the lifeblood of events is obviously sponsorships and things like that. So if you have sponsorship related pages, again, if you can track who's visiting those, then those are the sorts of people you might target with a more with a specific remarketing campaign. In education, when we talk about things like prospectuses, running courses, again, there's a common theme with all these things. When people are looking at the more detailed aspects of what you hold online, when you can track those interactions, you can target that audience more confidently that they are seriously interested in whatever you've got to offer, because they're looking at things that most people wouldn't. A great tip I had from an old friend of mine in terms of one of the things that they do from a remarketing perspective. They offer big enterprise systems to global corporations, so it's not transactional. E-commerce is really, really far removed from what they do. So they have pages which display financial information about them as an organization, and when they see people looking at that, they use that from a remarketing campaign perspective, because very simply, they regard it, if you're looking at financial information, you're doing due diligence on them as a company, and therefore you are a prospect at probably an advanced stage. So there's lots and lots of ways in which you can use the principle of a remarketing campaign to target people based on their previous interactions. And that's really the core to it. It is a previous interaction. Now, of course, for a lot of the examples I've been talking about here, I'm talking about website interactions, but real world interactions can just as easily be done. We just then need to use the dreaded integration word when it comes to getting the data. But certainly, we've seen examples of remarketing as well, where someone's attended a real world appointment, or actually attended an event in person. And again, those are the sorts of things that can then drive a remarketing campaign from a tracked real world interaction as well as a website based one. And this is the thing, it's not just necessarily about website interaction, it's not just necessarily about a specific event. Remarketing campaigns can support the customer journey. So when certain things happen in your world, like a first purchase, great, you've made one purchase, now let's talk about the next. Again, it's a great way to nudge people along the customer journey. And that's a really, really important point, because remarketing can get a bit of a bad rap. Maybe not so much in email, but certainly when you look at the way it can be, and indeed is used with things like PPC and what have you, there's certainly a lot of examples where the technology is used not necessarily in a great way. So with great power comes great responsibility as far as remarketing is concerned. And you'll see a growing trend, a growing backlash against marketing tracking technologies, because people have, are skeptical of how their data and how they are being tracked. So certainly as far as Apple is concerned, in the last 12 months, they started with apps. It's now extended to email. They are giving users of their devices the opportunity to block the tracking mechanisms that we use, and indeed others use, to get this insight. And as I say, the reason I say with great power comes great responsibility is I think it's absolutely fine to run remarketing campaigns, but your approach to it needs to be sensible. And in my experience, it doesn't matter what form of marketing technology it is. It doesn't matter whether it's something really, really basic or really, really sophisticated. There's always someone that will abuse it. And what I mean by that, just things like LinkedIn, every day I'll get requests from someone who I don't know, who's, helping millions of companies do amazing things. And oh yeah, I'll accept. Do I know them? I think I know them. And 3 hours later, you get the straight into the hard sell. So that happens, and obviously there are people out there that will always do that sort of stuff. It doesn't matter what marketing toys they have available to them. What I'd encourage you to do, if you feel that there's a value in using remarketing within your organization, then you think about it intelligently. And what I tend to recommend is you think about it from the perspective of adding value, not just going straight from the perspective of, oh, because you've done something and I've tracked you, I'm going to try and flog you something even harder than I would have done normally. So the tone and the style, and indeed, the way in which you conduct yourself from a remarketing perspective is incredibly important, because remarketing campaigns can get a very negative reaction. And if obviously you send out emails and people's reaction to them is, oh, I'm not really happy with them stalking me in that way, and they unsubscribe, then that can be quite counterintuitive. And with a view to that, the simple rule that I use with remarketing is to follow the advice of this chap. And just to check that you all haven't fallen asleep yet, by all means, let's have a little bit of audience participation. If you use the chat or the Q&A function at the top of the screen, can anyone tell me who this handsome fellow is? The handsome fellow, oh, that way, not this handsome fellow, of course. Anyone know who he is? Tough crowd. Okay, no one knows who he is. Fair enough. Oh no, no, that's not right. Well, that's fine. You're not the first audience I've tried this little test with, and you certainly won't be the last one. No one knows. It's Sir Isaac Newton. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Newton's third law. And what the relevance of that from a remarketing perspective is, whatever the interaction is that you tracked, be it real world or digital, think about a proportionate reaction. If I connect to someone on LinkedIn, I don't expect a massive sales pitch within 5 minutes. If I have tracked that someone's been reading a case study on my website, perhaps offering them a demo of my solution, my product, my service is a proportionate reaction, but perhaps not. Perhaps you need to think about the other ways in which you can lead people along the customer journey. And that's really the key. Think about these points. Remarketing can support the normal customer journey. When people are looking for a solution and your product or service has that potential solution, chances are they're looking at others as well. So you have the opportunity to be the one that nudges them. You have the opportunity with remarketing to be the one that reminds them to, complete the purchase, of course, but help them on the normal customer journey. And chances are, certainly in the business-to-business sphere, but also for our public sector customers, in terms of getting people engaged with digital services, there's often a lot of reticence to actually embrace these things fully. So you have a new digital service, someone registers for an account, but they don't then carry out and go through the actions of using those tools. Give them a little nudge, help them along the journey that you want them to take. And really that means offering utility. Can we help you? Can we make it simpler for you? Can we shortcut? you know, what would otherwise be a process which you're either not prepared to take or confused by, and can we offer additional value? And of course, additional value, again, relating back to that e-commerce space, often equals a discount code or free shipping or something like that. But in more complex propositions and other ways, you know, think about exclusivity, think about added value. Remember I said about the white paper. Thank you so much for downloading our white paper. Here's something else which we're only sending to those who have you know, been nice enough to actually read the original, you know, get the extended research piece, get the extended report. Here's a video recording, or indeed, you know, would you like a one-to-one session with our research team to talk about your specific circumstances, whatever it might be. You know, the idea here is, you know, all that you're trying to do is cause people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't have done. Remarketing is quite often best used in a situation where the customer journey is stalled. In other words, you saw an indication that someone was going to do the thing that you wanted them to do. They started going down that path and then they stopped or perhaps paused. And a lot of the time, sometimes it will be a case of, well, you know, just giving them a nudge. They may have done it anyway. You're not entirely sure in a week or two, but let's just give them a gentle nudge along the process by offering them utility, helping them to overcome whatever objections they might have or confusion, and indeed, you know, offering them some sort of incentive. You know, quite often the tone of the best remarketing emails makes those who receive them feel special, feel like they're getting something over and above what others would have received. Now, at that juncture, we move to the more practical side of things. Well, how do you actually run a remarketing campaign? And it's all very well me sitting here and saying, oh yeah, well, you know, if people have been on this page, then send them this email. But how does that all work? Well, the answer is there's a whole series of technologies that can be used to achieve that. Normally what we find is the source of the information will be one of the three things on the left there, either your website, your CRM, or perhaps if you have an app or some sort of digital app, digital service, then you will have data that's coming out of that. Obviously with the website, that tends to revolve around people accepting cookies. However, if they are logged in, if they have an account, then often you have the ability to track them in those ways. With CRM, that tends to be where real world interactions and things like that would be tracked and what have you. And then an app is very similar in terms of, again, people being logged in and you being able to, as a consequence, identify who it is and what they've done. Then on the eShop side of things, what you have is a range of technologies that you can use to actually trigger the remarketing campaigns. Now, remarketing in a way can be form-based. You know, if you can have both covert, you know, tracking mechanisms, but remarketing can also be done on the basis of overt, because they did this thing and they said they wanted to receive more information. I'm going to remarket to them. So it can be based on a trigger of a form fill. The other thing is you can hook things up to our API. So we have quite a few customers that run remarketing campaigns where the logic is going on their side, and then they would just pass us contacts into a group via our API, and that will indeed trigger a campaign. We also have the WordPress plugin that enables you to integrate with your WordPress site. And then last but not least, we have Zapier, which is a junction box of APIs. So if you do have e-commerce tools, things like WooCommerce and what have you, then you can hook eShop up to that system to be able to pass data between the two solutions. The other thing that we have with an eShop, if you're a Marketing Cloud customer, is we have the website tracking utility. And I just wanted to touch on that in a little bit more detail today, because for me, that is probably the most reliable and effective, easy ways of setting up a good remarketing workflow. So the website tracking utility within eShop involves us putting a tracking code on your web pages, and that can be across your whole site or specific pages depending on the requirement. And once contacts are visiting those pages, through the combination of the email tracking and the website tracking, we can identify who's doing what on your website, which is why you then see in the visitors section that we can say, you know, when was someone last on the website? And indeed, if you're using the lead scoring module, we can tell you, you know, how engaged they are based on their cumulative interactions. So it's a great insight tool, but it's not just from an insight perspective that the website tracking really comes into its own. It's also then, again, coming back to that Isaac Newton principle, because we've seen an interaction, an action, we can then automatically deliver an equal and opposite reaction. And we do that through things like the page tracking utility. So we can target certain pages, certain sets of pages. The only difference between categories and pages is, if my website has 5 pricing pages, then I might set up a category and put all those pricing pages in it. If it's an individual page, then I might just track an individual page. So we can set up and say, keep an eye on the pricing page. And once we tell eShop to keep an eye on the pricing page, what it will effectively do is go, well, I'm just going to log when people come to that pricing page. Now, once it's logged who's come to that pricing page, what we can then do is the clever stuff. We can actually trigger an automation off the back of that. And there's 2 steps to that. There's the trigger to begin with, and then there's the actual campaign itself. So if I just walk you through creating a trigger very quickly, when you create a trigger, all you need to do is give it a name. And then, as you saw, we're tracking the pricing page. So I'm just going to tell it to trigger when someone specifically visits that page. I'm also going to stick in my email address there, because what I want it to do is tell me when somebody does that, just so I can keep an eye on it. And most importantly, I'm going to add that contact to a group. So what that means then is every time somebody visits my pricing page, eShop's going to watch, it's going to wait, it's going to then put that person into a group. And it's also going to tell me. So, you can even dispense with the remarketing campaign itself. If you wanted somebody in a commercial capacity, a salesperson, to follow up with someone, then their interaction with the pricing page can be tracked, and it just alerts someone to follow up with this particular lead. But when you add them to a group, obviously, as I'm sure you're all aware as already, groups really are the lifeblood of the logic engine behind who we target via eShop. So once the website tracking has put somebody into a group, what you can then do is target that group with a campaign. And that, again, is a really, really easy thing to do, but it is worth thinking about the scenario of when and how should that remarketing email be triggered. The other thing is, obviously, in line with what I said earlier on about offering utility, offering added value, you need to design the email as well, because this is an automation. This is going to be a case of setting something up and waiting for someone to do the thing that you've told eShop to keep an eye on, and then it's going to trigger an email automatically. There doesn't need to be, indeed, there shouldn't be any human interaction, human involvement from your side in actually sending out these remarketing emails. So if we bounce across to the campaign creation section of eShop, what I'm going to do, really simple, is set up my favorite type of campaign in eShop, an automation. And we'll give that a name, and we'll pick the automated series tool. And the first thing we're going to need to do is tell it to target that group that we set with the trigger. So as created that remarketing demo group, and basically anyone who goes into that group is going to be exposed to this automated series. The other thing that's important there is, to perhaps exclude customers. There might be people that it's not appropriate to receive the campaign. Next, we're going to set a weight, and that is an arbitrary decision for you. A lot of remarketing in the e-commerce space I see triggered within a matter of hours. If it is a more complex sale, if it is a more complex proposition, you might want to wait longer. And then you just add the email. We've got our design, it's there, it's ready to go. We're going to give it a name, and that's it. We now have a situation where the website tracking is watching out for who comes onto the site and who goes to specific pages. It puts them in a group. We then wait 2 hours, and then we send them an email. And that's it. It's that simple. Now, when you do these sorts of campaigns, it's also often a good shout to choose new contacts only, because obviously people can visit your site multiple times, and you do want to avoid a situation where you're triggering the same remarketing campaigns to people again and again. So it's really, really simple, but I can tell you this, it's incredibly effective. These types of campaigns have the best engagement, they have the best conversion rates, and indeed, when we think about that kind of that principle as I talked about earlier on, of just checking, just confirming if someone is genuinely interested in your products, your services, or what it is you have to offer. Those interactions with a remarketing campaign will give you a lot of reassurance that you are targeting the right people with the right message. So what I mean by that is obviously, you've observed buying behavior, you've seen them on the website, you've seen them perhaps, doing other things. And it's an important point to note. I've talked through obviously doing a remarketing campaign based off a website interaction today, but you can equally do that based on an email interaction as well. So if you've already sent out a newsletter and there was something in your newsletter which was of high importance, then again, if people visit the link via the email, then you can also target them. You can program eShop to say, if someone clicks on this link in this email, or maybe different emails, put them in a group, and that group can then be exposed to a remarketing campaign. But effectively, all we're doing here is we are, as I say, that Sir Isaac Newton principle. Whenever you're thinking about remarketing, just think of good old Isaac, and just think, right, okay, we've got a proposition here. When we do marketing for it, people are going to react. When they react, how should we follow up with them? How should we react to them? And it's really no more complicated than that. What I would also say is, it doesn't have to be salesy. It doesn't have to be a case of, just sending somebody something where there's a proposition. Remarketing can be used in all sorts of ways, depending on the customer journey and the proposition. Now, as I say, there are a myriad of ways in which you can kind of hook up the technologies. And what quite often happens when I sort of do one-to-one versions of this sort of session is your average marketer will turn around and say, well, this is great, Dan, but I just don't know where to start as far as the technology side of things is concerned. And the good news is, that's kind of why we're here to help. So my technical team, I'm sure many of you have interacted with our support before. We've got lots of geeks. They know how these things work, and we're very happy to help to get things set up. Sometimes, obviously, when it's particularly geeky, that we might need to charge you a couple of pennies to get things set up. So things like developer support with the API is obviously an additional service. But generally speaking, wherever the data is, if it's on your website, then obviously you may have tools on your website already, which means we can track it. We just need to get it to talk to eShop, or indeed, you can look at things like the website tracking utility to do that. Obviously, if you've already got it in place, then the hard yards are already there. You've already got the technology in place. But adding that website tracking to your website is about a 5-minute job for the right person who knows what they're doing. As I also mentioned, plenty of other ways in which you can get things hooked up. And as I said, you can have covert remarketing whereby you track an interaction and send an email off the back of it, with a view to that kind of more privacy focused world where people are a little bit can be a little bit unsure about doing things like remarketing campaigns because of the bad press things like Facebook and Google get. It's absolutely fine to also do remarketing based on overt interactions. So in other words, rather than targeting the person that visits the pricing page with a remarketing email, target the person who visits the pricing page and asks for a callback or a quote. I'm sure you have other systems and processes in place to ensure that those sorts of inquiries are followed up with in the real world. Of course, the sales team are going to call them as soon as possible, but there's no harm from a marketing perspective in you having a sweep up operation, a remarketing campaign, assuring them that you've got their inquiry and someone will follow up with them, and here's some other really useful information that they could find while they're waiting for sales to give them a call back. As I also mentioned, WordPress plugin, if your site is running on WordPress, it makes it really, really easy to put forms and other elements of the eShop solution into the website. So if you haven't got that running, again, check it out. So, oh, sorry, and I forgot to mention, sorry, I forgot my own slides there. The last one, as I mentioned again before, Zapier, we can hook eShop up to e-commerce solutions and a myriad of other tools through that, and it means you don't need developers to do the crazy work of integration. So, in summary, why wouldn't you run a remarketing campaign? As I say, they are fantastic. As I say, it doesn't have to be salesy, and I would strongly encourage you not to be, overly salesy in them, because I think that's got every chance of getting just as much of a negative reaction as a positive one in this day and age. Help people on the journey, support the journey. But the other thing is, interesting little stat from the Interactive Advertising Bureau there, 70% of marketers use retargeting to increase brand awareness. So it might not actually be that you need to reflect their previous behavior at all in terms of helping on the customer journey. Someone's shown them some form of interest in your organization. You just want to tell them more about you, what you do, what you're up to. So it could be something completely unrelated to the actual interaction that you tracked. But there's no harm when someone is showing the right signs, when they are showing engagement, to follow up with them perhaps a little bit differently and educate them about you, your business, and indeed your organization, and how perhaps they might engage with you further. Fab. Well, I think I've just about behaved and done it on time. Yeah, 11:30 on the dot. As I say, though, we do have time for Q&A if you do want to stick around. We have got other workshops as well. We've already done a few. There's one coming up on email design in a couple of weeks, and all the ones that we've done so far are also available on demand, which we'll send out links in follow-up to this session so that you can access the recordings of those if you'd like to learn more. The Welcome Series one of the first ones I did, has some parallels with the session today. Certainly highlight that as well worth a watch as well if you're interested in remarketing. So if you do need to drop straight off, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that was helpful. But for anyone who does want to stick around, I'm equally very happy to take questions. And it looks like we do have one. If you have website tracking on your account, can it be integrated across multiple website sites or only one? So that's a great question. So what we tend to do is you can have different tracking codes. What we try and discourage is having the same tracking code across multiple sites. That can get a bit confusing. So it tends to work on a one-to-one basis with a sub account. So one sub account, one brand, one website tends to be the structure. What we do have with some customers is they'll have multiple landing pages. So rather than their core website, they'll have landing pages where they can run the tracking code as well. But yeah, basically wherever that tracking code is installed, eShop will track just from a kind of housekeeping perspective rather than any kind of technical reason. We tend to sort of say one website, one tracking code, one set of data as a consequence. And I think that, oh, we've got a few comments, just people thanking me. That's great. Thank you very much. And yeah, by all means, I'm very happy to talk through anything that we've discussed today in more detail. Thank you for those. Great. Well, an easy one on the questions again. I never know whether it means everyone's got the answers to everything or whether I've confused everyone beyond belief. Oh, sorry, I was too trigger happy. Are there any other specific data protection considerations we need to be aware of regarding tracking? So yeah, I mean, certainly as far as the eShop website tracking utility is concerned, it is cookie based. So therefore you need people to allow cookies on the website. So that does open up a huge can of worms in itself, but I think that can of worms for the most part was opened by everybody a couple of years ago, and everyone's got the consent tools on their websites nowadays to cover that off. As part of the setup of that particular utility, we can give you the relevant information for you to update your privacy policies and cookie statements to accommodate that tracking. But yes, certainly if someone refused cookies on your website, then that would limit our ability to use that tracking. As I say, marketing insights and tracking in the more general sense, it's often an onion peeling exercise. We can use a variety of tools to get a degree of insight. What we can't do is track everything that everybody does, and neither should we. But for those who are comfortable to engage with you in certain ways and allow certain forms of tracking, then that works very well. And as you saw with the examples I made reference to earlier on, it's often a case of it being a win-win. So, quite frankly, I'm registered with Adidas and I have an account with them, and they've got my email address, and those two things are linked because I will happily receive discount codes for the things that I've been looking at on their website. So it's back to that. What are you actually going to do with this technology if your customers, whether it's existing customers or prospects, or indeed just your audiences in a more general sense, are happy because they see that you are being responsible with the way in which you use their data, then you often find that's no problem. But I'm not going to dress it up. There is an increasingly challenging backdrop of legislative changes and indeed technology changes to kind of treat all forms of marketing tracking technology as evil. But for me, the technology is just doing a simple thing. It's how people use that technology which needs to be kept in check. But yeah, obviously, within the realms of, we're not able to give legal advice, we can provide additional assistance from a data protection perspective if you've got concerns on that front. Okay, I think that's probably it. It looks like most people have dropped off now. So for those who have stuck around for the Q&A, that's great. Hopefully that additional couple of minutes was useful to you. If, as I say, you'll be getting an email from us because guess what? Because you attended, we tracked that you've done that, and we will send you an email as a consequence, and those that didn't attend won't get that email because you're special. So thank you for joining me, and look out for the follow-up email. There'll be some useful resources in that, and indeed, obviously, if you have any questions on what I've covered today, then we'll be really happy to chat about it further. So thank you very much, and I hope to catch you all again soon.